Welcome back to Dirty Words.
Words. If you can't tell, we hired professional audio people, and it's called AMP Sound Enhancer, aka me.
For those of you that may be new, welcome to the Dirty Words podcast. This is a pop political podcast that's focused on bringing you the most up-to-date, breaking political and pop culture news. That was our breaking news sound, but I want to let you know I lied. This is actually just a space that we made to create and talk about ideas and concepts and potentially breaking news. We just realized that we had a lot of opinions that we were sharing with each other and with our third host, who is not here today, but we'll bring that up in a second, and wanted to create a space where we could discuss this and also invite you all to the conversation. So thank you for being here. And if you've been here from the beginning, woo, ayo, shout out to you. I'm one of your hosts, Marissa.
And I'm Alex.
And for those that have been here before, we have a third person, Iridian, who's off living her beautiful life and will be jumping in when she can, and is not here today. So you just get Alex and me. Hope you're happy with that.
Yay!
Today, we hope that you can find some cathartic points in our episode, and we also know it could be really heavy for some people. So please take the space and time that you need. Today we're going to talk about grief.
Grief is deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement.
So I want to do something new. We typically introduce the episode and we'll do some of our favorite things, and we thought grief was so important and so relevant to the things that have been going on that instead of doing a favorite things portion, we just want to do a check-in with each other and kind of let that conversation go into the bigger ideas that we have for this episode. So Alex, I have to ask, after sharing that beautiful definition, how are you doing?
That's a loaded question and a little bit rude because we live together. So you literally know we have the same DNA.
We save all of our talking for this, so we haven't talked in 8 months.
How am I doing? I would say since the last episode, like June or July, life has kind of felt like a fever dream, and like things have seemed to move really quickly, but also seemed to move really slowly.
Yes.
I won't get too much in the details of everything that happened because we're going to talk about it as we dive into grief, but like we had a death in our family, and then everything in the world with politics and just processing that and making sure I still have a job. There's just been a heaviness and a confusion, but also some beautiful moments to connect with friends and family, and probably one of the better holiday seasons I've had in a long time, just getting to be around loved ones. But Marissa, how are you doing?
Oh, what a roller coaster it's been since the last time we talked, everyone.
Woo! That's our roller coaster noise.
So like Alex said, we had a death in the family. I traveled for a new job that I have. I left a job that I had for almost 3 years.
You got another job too.
I got another job that was just seasonal for a little bit. I made the local university dislike my sister and I more than they already did. A lot of things happened, and like
we'll
Alex,
talk about that in the bystander episode.
Yeah, so stay tuned for the bystander episode. But like Alex said, it kind of feels like a fever dream. Like it doesn't feel like August to now has actually happened.
No.
And it has been really emotional.
We aged up too in August.
Oh yeah, we aged up.
Or we had a birthday.
Yeah, it's, for all my gamers out there, we aged up. But yeah, it doesn't feel real. And I just want to say to whatever entities out there, I did not volunteer to life like this.
No, I didn't. I don't think I signed up. I don't think I signed up for this.
I didn't sign up for this. So let's just bring it down a notch.
We're going to restart the game. I have unlimited lives. Restart.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And getting more into the specific topics of the episodes, we'll get into some more detail. Those are some updates on us and our beautiful lives.
Because we know that you needed to know. And if you're going through anything similar, we're here for you. Let us know.
As you can tell over the last year, there's been a lot of job changes, ups and downs, fluctuations. So
yes,
we sit with that.
Yeah.
Circling back to the death in the family. So our last podcast was in June or July.
Yeah.
And 6 months or 8 months, however long, I don't know, time is made up. It feels, know that it could be less months for you if you decided to listen to us on repeat, but that's another conversation. after the last podcast we recorded, our grandpa has had dementia for multiple years, or diagnosed at least, and it started to decline pretty quickly, and towards the end of August he passed away. And so the ending of summer was really just taken over with processing death and trying to be with family and slowing down and trying to get some stable footing under our feet.
And which I want to add, we in the past year and a half actually lost both of our grandpas.
Yes.
We sadly were closer to one than the other, and that's how life works sometimes. So this was one of the closest deaths I think you and I have ever had, and I believe the first funeral either of us had attended. So that was all like a new experience for us in our mid to late 20s, which is great that we can have new experiences and also just something to sit with.
I would say that the theme, and it's kind of why this episode's labeled this, since like August, and part of the check-in and why it's kind of all flowing together, has been this element of grief, right? It started with this personal grief of our grandpa passing. I would say that our grandpa is someone, I don't want to speak for Marissa, so I'll just speak for myself, is someone who has shaped who I am in the world and how I function. He is someone who fiercely believes in standing up for people and trying to make the world a better place and leading through kindness and caring. And like, of course, like all people, he had his quirks about him. And those are tenets that through my mother and just through being in spaces with him that I learned. And it's part of why I function in the world the way that I do.
I agree. I think when you have big personalities that can influence you, and he was a big personality, he would sing musical theater songs and also would threaten businesses if they didn't let his black coworkers in long ago. Not physically threaten, just like say, we're going to take away our business if you don't serve everyone equally. I think when you have a personality like that, that you realize how much influence they give to their spheres around them.
Yeah.
So like learning more about my grandpa, I learned how much my parent had taken from him.
Yeah.
And things like that, and learned from him, and how that had been passed down.
Both of our parents.
Yeah, and that had been passed down to both of us and our siblings. And so it's just really interesting to realize how much influence social spheres and communities and families can have on each other. So I think that was really eye-opening. And it's also, when you're grieving and there's a death, it's been fascinating to see
how the world responds.
Yeah. And like, I realized that I have said this too, so please do not feel a certain way about my opinion on this. But when people say I'm sorry when something's happened, I hate that. People kept texting me, I'm so sorry. And I was like, why the fuck are you sorry? I was like, unless you personally killed him and are letting me know that you're sorry. I was like, why are you apologizing?
Him with dementia.
I was like, I can't say anything to you when you say I'm sorry.
So
just thank you.
Part of grief is like feeling and processing and talking.
Yes.
Right. And this is something Merce and I have talked about off recording, but also like we can expand on here. Part of sorry is sorry doesn't make way for like a response. Like if we think of improv or something, like saying I'm sorry doesn't really give way for a conversation.
It kind of feels like saying no.
Yeah, like if I'm feeling heavy emotions, I understand the intention, and like I say it all the time to people. It's something that I'm really trying to learn how to shift away from. It's to show sympathy and empathy and to try and create space for someone. And sometimes I think it actually does the opposite of creating space, right? Like it actually doesn't make space to talk or share. I would say some of the best moments I have of processing were actually getting like to tell stories and share pictures and like people who let me talk about him, because in American culture, and like Marissa can speak to the other perspective of like not technically having paid time off, like we live in this culture, and I would say like any kind of Western society that's really focused on capitalism, that grief is like a couple day process, right? Like if it's a close family member, like it's like 3 to 5 days you get off. If it's a distant family member or like someone you casually know, quotes around casual, whatever that means by definition, you get like a day off maybe.
Yes.
And that's if you are lucky enough to even have paid time off. And then you're supposed to kind of be over it and you're supposed to continue on and life goes on and everything moves on.
Well, we had a moment with someone that I still think that we're friends. I don't know what they think. but they reached out and checked in and said, like, please take the time that you need.
No,
like,
I think they said take the weekend.
Take the time you need, take the weekend. And then they weren't joking. By like Monday, they were like, okay, here's what you can do for me. And I was like, oh, like, I understand.
We were literally traveling to the funeral and we were like, what?
Yeah, I was like, I understand that everyone has shit going on, okay?
Yeah.
Our grandpa passing away and with medical support and having the ability to have his family show up to honor his life is a huge privilege. And it was just a weird experience to have someone that like you're close to literally give you 2 days and be like, okay, now we're going to move on to something else. Because I think there's this really interesting meme that I've shared with people before, who I know have had like really close loved ones pass away. And it's kind of a meme, a graph, I guess, more like an infographic thing that has grief as like a big ball and it's in a jar. And it shows like over time, like your jar will change size and usually gets bigger because like you're growing and changing as a person, and your grief stays the same. Like your grief doesn't change size, but you change, and you find ways to live with that grief and make space for other things to be with that grief. And I realize, like Alex was saying, in America, we don't do that.
No.
And so I've
what we do, if we have the jar and like that's the grief, what we would do, Marissa, is like we would reach our hand in and take the grief out of the jar and then chuck it into the back corner of a closet and lock the closet door and then be like, look at how nice my jar is.
Yeah. But if you're a therapist, don't message me about this. I've become a little obsessed with death. And so I read a book called This Party's Dead about death culture around the world and death ceremonies. And I've just kind of embraced that aspect and have not been, I guess, researching, but also just reading about people's experience with grief, because not that it was like blocked off from our immediate family per se, but in general in America, like Alex said, we don't talk about it. It's like, take your couple of days. And if like,
I mean, my workplace was fantastic, but like I came back and it was very much like, I came back from going to a funeral and it was very much like work is normal. Like we're just moving on. And I'm like, my brain is still trying to like get back to step one, right? Like I'm still trying to figure out how I'm existing in the world.
My boss called me when I was away for the funeral and she's like, there's a meeting you have to jump on. And I said, no, I'm not there. I'm not even wasn't even an employee for them. And I had to text, like I was being harassed in a group chat and I had to text the group chat and say, death isn't convenient. I'm not available. I said I was out this whole week. And so that just should not be an experience that anyone has to have.
Which for all of you who had sound effects, AMP, LLC sound effects.
Go ahead and pay her.
Everyone who also gasped and went, what? Or I have experienced that. Just know Marissa quit that job.
Yeah, I did quit. That's the job that I quit. So happy about that. But Alex did make a comment to me recently when she was saying her job was fantastic. She also, I don't know if she would use the word guilty, if you would use the word guilty, but she had another coworker who had somebody pass away. And I don't even know if they
multiple coworkers
if they took like a day or two, and some of them I don't think took any. And she said she was talking to her boss and was like, did I do something wrong? Like, I took a week off and these people haven't taken any. Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do this. And her boss had to be like, no. Like, that's good that you're sitting with those emotions.
Which,
that's
like,
good that you're holding space.
How even if our systems are set up to potentially allow us to feel, we choose not to sometimes. Yeah. And I think with the passing of Grandpa, I noticed something really fascinating, and you and I have been referring to it as like extended grief, right? Yeah. He had a degenerative disease. Like, we knew an end was going to come at some point, and like it's been a couple years that we've been watching this, and like. And also when you throw COVID into it, like it adds distance and like being able to connect in that capacity, especially with someone who's struggling to remember. Mm-hmm. And so there's this element of like grieving over time, right? Like we saw elements of the person that we knew leaving over time. And then finally it was like this culmination of like the physical presence of this person leaving, which also there's a piece to it, right? That like, hopefully he is at one again in some capacity.
He is Catholic, so hopefully he's up in heaven.
Yes.
That's what we know. That's where he is. So I like respecting his beliefs.
But there's an interesting part of like this idea of extended grief, right? Yeah. Like feeling it over time and then reaching a pinnacle. And especially with older individuals, I think there's just this feeling from society that's like, well, you knew this was coming and like they were going to pass no matter what. And like, basically move on, like get over it. But that's not how grief or feelings work.
Well, my grief was sitting kind of like that, And I told people that. I was like, it is heartbreaking, but it was something that was expected to come, like based on health things and different things that had been happening. And I realized when I was saying that to people, I was giving them an out to not care and then to push it and be like, okay, well, why aren't you at this meeting then?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that doesn't mean I don't care. It just means that I was at a different stage of processing what was happening because I was aware of these other circumstances impacting it. Also, I realized with extended grief too.
Yeah.
Like Alex said, it's not only leading up to it that you realize like what was happening. Like if anyone else has someone in their family that suffered from dementia, you know, it just doesn't just like click on overnight, right?
No.
So like looking back, I was like, oh, like those were things that were probably signs that might have been happening and people didn't catch earlier. But I realized even post funeral and post death, like Valentine's Day was last week, and we were like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be our grandma's first Valentine's Day basically in her whole adult life.
Yeah.
Alone. They met when she was 20.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean for her? And like, yeah, so it just is remembering those little moments. Like, there's going to be so many first again with the absence of a person, and not like the absence of their physical being, right? Like, we can hold like that. I think that's what part of grief is like holding that memory and holding that space and like the influence that they still will continue to have after they're gone. So it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
And I'll let you go first before I share what one of his dying wishes was.
Oh. So I would say it's something that we've both been sitting with, and like we've talked about, like I said, off recording a bit, and to actually talk about like the physical feeling of grief. The current culture, if you live in the US or if you live in a culture that has similar stuff, it wants things to fit neatly into boxes and it wants to organize stuff, and like grief is messy. Like there's no way around it, right? It's
not convenient. It doesn't work on a time schedule.
No, and like you don't process it on a certain time schedule, and like there's some days that feel really good and there's some days that feel like really heavy. And I know like our mom is the one who made our grandpa a dad in the first place. She's the
oldest kid.
That's the child. Yeah, she's also she's also the child that made our grandpa a grandpa. So like she was the first kid to have kids. And so like our mom will randomly message us and be like, I'm really missing my dad right now.
She had a girl dad. She was the only daughter as well. So she'll randomly message, and like there's days that like conversations are really normal, but then there's days that are like, this feels heavy, like something's hitting differently today. And so like grief is almost like this physical feeling of just like heaviness sometimes. And like, it's almost like if you're lifting a weight, like you have to slow down or you have to do things differently. But then for some reason it's an inconvenience to the world around you. So then you have this feeling of being a little bit isolated and kind of being like, okay, well, like, I guess I'll just go in my little corner and feel by myself then, because it's not allowed in these spaces. Yes. And I want to say with the feelings, if anyone's like starting to be like, oh, this is like sad. Wow, they're talking about death and grief.
This isn't sad. This is beautiful.
And I also want to just share like a fun story about our mom. Our mom's telling us that she's been sad or missing her dad. I will say, our parents were not practicing Catholics, but Catholicism was taught to them.
Yes.
And my mom always jokes that the one thing that stuck with her is the belief in like ghosts and spirits.
Yeah.
And so we did get a note from our mom that she had been trying to contact the spirit of her dad and was trying to talk to his ghost. So there's just a fun little caveat if you're feeling a little down.
They're listening and they're like, that's not
they're
fun.
Like, what? But
no, but we all have different ways of processing.
Everyone processes in different ways, right? So that's like a meaningful experience. And she has all these stories, like she had lost a best friend when she was younger, about how she felt like her best friend was like her guardian angel after that. So there's things, that's like how we can connect, and like I said, like that influence lives on.
And if we think about grief in our personal lives, I love this quote from people attributed to the MCU from WandaVision.
Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah. And from WandaVision, but it's also like when you start searching it, people are very much like, there's a bunch of names that we say associated with. But what is grief if not love persevering? So like when we're talking about feeling, and yes, it might have a heaviness or sadness to it because we're talking about a passing or potentially like something that feels like a passing or something bad happening. And grief is also an emotion that's tied to love, right? Like we're talking about the feeling of love that couldn't be expressed, or we're talking about a feeling of love for something or for something that could be. So there's also like a beauty to it, right? Like it's a beautiful thing that we can feel this emotion, and it's a beautiful thing that we can view other people and situations and spaces like this.
And for those of you that are like, I didn't come here for a psychology lesson, I thought this was about politics or something.
I don't think anyone's saying that.
No, I also don't think you all talk like that. I'm sorry.
I think you all talk really cute and sweet.
Yeah. I was going to say, so my grandpa's dying wish, one of them was that Trump would not be president. Which is, I'm pissed at all of you. I'm angry
Not
about
you
that.
as in the listeners, but just like you as in the collective.
America. Literally at his funeral, during like the religious ceremony stuff, one of
the
his
priest is talking and it's like, he was a Catholic man, he was a father. His friend leans forward,
leaning forward, tapping on us. He's a Democrat. He
was a
votes
Democrat
Democrats.
too.
So I'm pissed at you, not you, you know, the you that I'm talking about. Just because even through all of his struggles, he was still able to prioritize like the well-being of the whole versus himself.
Yeah.
And wanted Kamala to be president and wanted Trump to not be president.
Yeah.
So I'm pissed, and I think this is when we saw a second wave of grief come, was with the election, because it was like funeral, whatever, what holidays? Labor Day, I think, is in September, right?
We had like Labor Day, Halloween,
like we had a couple holidays, but then we're like election, like it was like,
but like all October, right? We
We
go to the funeral in September, and then by the time we get home, like from traveling,
it was like take a day off for one holiday and then election.
Yeah. And then like October was like election. And then November was the voting.
Like we looked at each other and I said, Halloween doesn't feel like Halloween. I was like, this doesn't feel like anything good.
And kind of tying it to why we wanted to put these in one episode together, or like chat together, is because like a death in a family is like an interpersonal grief, right? Like it has to do with a relationship or like losing someone, right? That has to do with an interpersonal. But we can also experience this form of grief like in a social political context, right? Like on a national scale, on a bigger scale outside of like a personal relationship. Like this grief of the world, it almost feels like that we live in. So we thought that there was an interesting tie to them. And also like for us, I'm going to speak for Marissa for a second, the processing was together, right?
Yeah.
Because it all like
It's all
meshed
been
together.
Yeah. I mean, I would still say we're in the grief process.
Yeah.
We're 5 months, 6 months out now. Like, so you walk into the election season, and even before the election happens, I was sharing with Alex that I was sitting with a type of grief about like, this is our future.
Yeah.
I do 100%, as I selfishly wanted a woman president.
Same.
Like I hands down wanted a woman to be president.
Also wanted the most qualified person who had the ability to win.
Wanted the most qualified person to also be president. And I knew that Vice President Kamala Harris was not representing all of my interest.
Yes,
I was
100%.
watching her speak on Israel and Palestine, and it was ripping apart my heart.
Yeah.
But then I was also hearing what the other front runner, what her opponent was willing to do. Yeah. And it was a lot worse, a lot of the things. And it would be me as a privileged white person making a political statement with my vote versus voting for my neighbors and for like the well-being of and their survival of the neighborhood that I'm in. So it was a really hard decision because there was kind of almost like a sacrifice of morals in voting for Kamala.
Yeah.
And I do think that she was the better option
100%
out of the choices of who would be president.
Well, and so then the election day happens. Yeah. Right.
Which I was going into it being like, we have
nothing to worry about.
I was like, the old people love her.
We were at a funeral and people were making sure at the funeral to take time to say like, I am Democratic and I am voting for Harris. And I was like, we're talking about like rural Midwest, like cool, like we got this.
My grandma's calling me and she's like, I'm looking to be able to volunteer with the Kamala campaign and figure out the best way to get
write
involved.
Letters to people.
There's all this stuff happening in our town about spreading the awareness about the blue candidates and Democrats.
I also think I had this like hope that like we're all the centers of our own world. Yes. I was like, my grandpa's gonna do something and we're gonna pull this through. Like,
I was like, we can't lose.
Yeah, it's
because
not-
my grandpa said that he didn't want Trump to be president, and he's dead now. So like, there's not another option. It's Kamala, or there's just my brain's like, there's not
Yeah.
another option.
and so then it happens.
Yeah,
and
we're watching the votes come in. We're like, huh, this is
and
weird.
we see it go south, and I think like this second wave in its own way tied to the way, like the grief of losing someone, but like tied to the grief of like almost feels like losing the United States. This second wave comes in, and it's like in 2025 we're not ready to see a Black woman in the White House yet.
We're not ready to see the most qualified person because
Not
she's
ready
a
to
woman.
see the most qualified person. And don't get like, we know the conversation's a bit more nuanced than that, but like for the 72 million that didn't vote for her, it's not because of the nuanced conversation.
Yes.
And so like sitting with this like this really heavy feeling that like now months later I'm labeling as like a feeling of grief of like, whew, like it felt like we were building and we were going somewhere, but we're not where I thought we were as a society.
It's like we didn't change anything from 2016.
We didn't change anything from
To
1990, from
Yeah.
1980. Like, and it was just like this heaviness of like, not only have things not changed as much as I hoped, but also like what is about to be destroyed.
Yeah. Well, not to be infantilizing too, I think I will claim the South and the Midwest with my full chest. I think those are places that we can't forget about and can't abandon.
And we've only lived there.
Yeah, and that's where we've lived. That's why I'm claiming those. I think I had this deep sadness for the fact that all of these communities in those spaces were essentially tricked into voting for a candidate that didn't actually want to serve them. They
Like,
used
there's
hot
a
topic. Sorry. Well, I was going to say they used like hot topic interest things like abortion and trans bathroom things and DEI, when those aren't the issues that are facing people. Like, you're talking about very small populations of things, and instead they use that to get people's votes, and they use those really quotes around divisive currently topics, and it hurts me because I know that it's not going to serve rural people. And not to say that I knew that Kamala would be better, but I know for a fact some of the things they have in place is not going to help. We're already seeing it in February 2025. We're already seeing rural farmers get hurt.
Yeah.
We're not seeing egg prices go down. Like, there's so many things that we're seeing. So I think that's part of where I was too, like personally. And also, like, I've been in those communities.
Yeah.
I have respect for people that are different than me and do have different opinions, but it's also, I just hate seeing people not be given a choice. And I don't think they were given a fair choice.
Yeah. And I do think that there's some responsibility in 2025, right? And that this is a whole other bucket of conversation. But like, to timeline it, we were 2 months out from the funeral, and then it feels like you're like punched in the gut again, and you're like, this world that my grandpa was attempting to live for, right? Like, Mercer shared that he was involved in different like civil rights thing, and like he was on a bunch of different nonprofit boards, and like he was
working on stuff to like feed people and help with equity in the community.
Super involved in his community, and like was pushing to make a world where people were seen as their full selves. And we have family members, like direct family and cousins, that have different gender and sexuality identities, and like, at least externally, like that was always welcomed and embraced with open arms by someone who lived through a world war.
He's a cis straight Catholic white man.
Yeah.
And he was able, in his 90s, was able to like work through some of this stuff and accept people as they are.
Yeah.
And still push for a better tomorrow.
So like to be processing his death, and then to be like,
oh, 70+ million of you didn't get it.
Yeah. And like, we don't care about the people who have been fighting. There was just like, there was a social political grief with that, about like, whew. And like, if we think about like what is grief if not love persevering, it was tied to this love of like, I know this is going to be a wild thing to say, as much as I have disdain for aspects of this country, like I love this country and I love a majority of the people in it. And like, I think the United States has the potential to be such a beautiful nation of diversity and equity and be a leader in what it means to build kind and trusting communities. And like it was this heaviness of being like, that might not happen, or that might not happen in a timeline that I'll get to be a part of.
Yeah.
And that, so it was like the second wave for the election.
Yeah. Well, that was also happening on, not to bring it back to me, a personal scale for me, because as I mentioned, I left one of my jobs for almost 3 years. I left it.
That is not the breaking news noise. That was the excitement noise.
I made a note to the person like at the end of November, like a couple weeks after the election. The conversation didn't go well, and so I sent in my notice and said that I would be leaving. That it was no longer a fit for me, and I had been realizing for a while with this job that they were promoting ideas that I believed in, about like a better future and sustainable access for people, but that's not actually what we were doing. And it started to get to a point when it was feeling predatory.
Yeah.
And it was just getting worse. And I was like, I can't be in a place where I'm going through these big personal changes. There's all of this stuff happening with the government. And I can't just continue to sit at a job where it feels like I'm tricking people into participating in things. And so with that, I decided to leave that job. And again, I know I've said this in other episodes. I know it's an extreme privilege to make that choice. I know some people can't just walk away like that. I do have another part-time job that at least will cover my rent, hopefully, if I did my math right. And I have the privilege of like, I live with Alex, my twin.
What?
Thank you,
when
Alex.
When did that happen? We were born together?
What? And then I have the privilege that I have friends and family that I know would be willing to support me, at least for like a couple months, like take me in if I got kicked out of my apartment or something. So I know everyone's not in that position, but it was like these multiple things happening where I was like, I didn't have rose-colored glasses. Like I've been aware of this, and it's not that I haven't been critical of organizations I've been a part of or what's happening with our politics, but it was like, when is enough enough?
Yeah.
And when will I let this like pain of knowing how much we've lost and what we will continue to lose in this fight for our future.
Yeah.
When will I reach a threshold when I was like, this is too much, and that I reached that point?
Well, and I think people started thinking about that around November and like the election, but then we're smacked with holidays. And so then like, it almost felt like there was like a pause on the feelings.
Well, my boss was like, well, do you want to wait until like mid-January because there's holidays? I was like, no, that's why I gave you my end date, so I'm not working through the holidays and taking money while I'm not working. Like,
but there's like this, and then the holidays come and like stuff kind of stops because people either get time off for the first time in the year or families getting together.
It's when we focus on community.
Yeah, it's like when we actually take a chance to focus on community. So like some of the heavy feelings took a bit of a pause, I would argue, at least for myself. Because like I said, we got to travel to see some family for the holidays, and like there was road bumps with that, like any holiday family gathering.
Yeah.
And like it was a really beautiful, I would say, joyous interaction, and like we got to see our older siblings.
We got to celebrate our older siblings' birthdays for the first time in person
in like a decade.
Yeah.
And so we circle into January.
Shout out to you if you're listening, sibling.
Oh yeah. They're our biggest fan. One day we'll have them when we start consistently making, we'll ask them to come on here and talk, and we'll have a good conversation.
So stay tuned for that, everyone. These are little Easter eggs.
They're like really cool.
Yeah. So these are Easter eggs to get you back.
And any of you are like, I want to talk. We've invited people to talk before, so like contact us and we can sit and chat.
Let us know.
But then January and the inauguration hits, and I think it was kind of like the culmination of like all of this grief for the past.
I was like, this isn't happening.
6 months, and it was like, no, this isn't real. But then like the executive orders and the stuff started coming in immediately, and it was like, okay, we have to sit with all of our feelings. Like the articles and supervisors like immediately started coming out and being like, this is intentional and this is supposed to be chaos and it's not going to be as bad as we think. But it's like, no, like we need to sit and feel. We like, I would argue we are where we are right now because like even in our personal lives, right, from processing losses in our personal lives, however that shows up, to the social political landscape, like we have refused to feel. And like, this is heavy, this is grieving, this is sad, this is scary. And so like,
You think if we were a culture that embraced grief and our the way that we responded and felt about things, that Guantanamo Bay would exist?
you think that COVID, like the way that we handled COVID would have
Like,
happened?
oh, that's a little maybe. Well, I guess those are both pretty extreme.
But no, I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
like, I think all of those feelings came up that I'm like, oh my gosh, we have an administration that like welcomed the death of millions of people
around the world,
and
yeah.
like, and just kind of shrugged about it. And I was like, those are my neighbors, and those are people that I want to be in community with and I care about. And like, what's to say that's not good? Like, it was like this fear of like what more grief is to come.
Yeah.
And
Like,
that
we've
really
lost
hit
so
with the
much.
inauguration.
We lost so much. What will we lose?
Yeah.
And I remember after the inauguration walking down the street and just like seeing people, and I was like, who can I trust?
Yeah.
Like, who would be willing to turn me over to the police if we got to a point when it was like
Yeah.
people that were against the government or like against certain executive orders? Like, who would look and be like, oh, those girls, we know they don't like the current president. Like, it was a weird feeling because, like Alex said, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually kind of like America, or like the concept. I like the concept of what it can be, and nothing.
Or
makes,
also like some of the people who are the backbone of America.
Yeah.
Like we are a nation built on immigrants. We are a nation built on diversity and freedom of speech and religion. Like,
not to mention the native people that were already here.
yeah,
like
there is horrible history, but there's also like a beautiful chance for community and to do like really powerful transformative justice things and connect people, and like,
which I think the perfect example of that dichotomy of like, how do we hold space for this pain and the sorrow and like the loss of what was or is, and this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think that beautiful balance. We'll link it in the podcast or post it on Instagram. The American History Society, two of them got together, or two history societies in America got together and like wrote a letter to the administration talking about the way they've talked about like education and the way we share history. And they're like, no, like, America has done bad things and we need to learn that so we can learn from it and move forward, and we can embrace like Alex said, like those moments where there has been beautiful things that have happened. Like, we are going through stuff with learning about family history, and we're learning about stuff on our grandma's side. Like, we just looked at some immigration papers from like 1920 or something like that through it wasn't Ellis Island, I forgot where it was, but we were just looking at stuff like that, and I was like, that's a beautiful thing that someone could travel across the ocean and come here and be maybe not have the best time, welcomed in though, and like there's things that we can get better at.
a lot
But
better,
the history letter, I think, was really good at walking that balance, because I think something that's going to be really important for all of us is that we can't let all of this consume us.
yeah
We have to embrace our grief and hold it and sit with it and learn from it and give it space, but we can't let it consume us, or we can't do anything
But you know, when it consumes us,
when we don't talk about it.
yeah. So like, back to the analogy that we talked about earlier. So like, I take this little grief ball and I throw it into this dark closet and I shut the door and lock it, and then I'm like, look at my pretty jar, it's so beautiful.
And then you're filling up your jar with other
I'm filling up my jar with
things.
other things. What's happening in the closet though?
Yeah.
This grief is growing. It's turning into like a gremlin. It's like, you have to let me out. I'm not meant to exist in the closet. I'm a part of you. Like, you have to let me be a part of you. And then this grief breaks through, and then we're left with no room in our jar, and then maybe the grief cracks our jar, and then we're left feeling broken or isolated or confused because we didn't sit with it, right? Like, what if we had opened the closet and we said, grief, come sit next to me. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let me know you. What are your roots? Where, like, what are you sitting with? Who am I feeling this about or for?
Yeah.
And like, how is, like I said, like, I believe that grief and love are directly tied together. So like, where is the love in this? And how can I use that to guide my actions moving forward? It's almost like there's a movie based off of this.
Disney.
If anyone's seen Inside Out, my brain has created
There's the little
for
characters
emotions.
running our emotions. With everything that we've discussed and will continue to discuss, I think it's essential that we acknowledge this pain. Like Alex was saying, like we have these little people. Because there might be someone listening who's like, this is kind of dramatic. Like, obviously you had your own personal death, but like presidents will president and then we'll move on to the next president.
Or there might be people who are like, I'm interjecting for a second. There might be people who are like, they're exploiting their grandpa's death and like they're tying it to politics.
He was a showman.
Yeah.
He loves attention.
And two, this is all connected, right? Like if I can't sit with my personal feelings, and like my personal feelings are also tied to like how to be a kind and caring person, because like this is a human that taught that stuff to me. And like it's almost like it got blown up on a bigger scale and like magnified that like, oh, there's barriers, there's just barriers in society to prevent the actions that you want to do in honor of this person. So also for anyone who's thinking like, how do these connect? If we're not making it clear, I apologize, and just know they do connect, because like being able to process the personal and internal also allows us to process the things that exist outside of us and like in the bigger landscape of our world.
And with like processing the things outside of us, like I said, like if you're listening being like, this is a bit dramatic, cool, like maybe you haven't had a personal death and like had this eye-opening experience of grief and death,
or maybe you're
things.
Just really
maybe you're
centered and whatever,
and you're like heard this before. I also want to acknowledge like there are bad things already happening.
Yes,
we have planes full of people being deported. We have unaccompanied minors, children, not being allowed access to resources in the States that were refugees seeking support here.
Yeah,
we just saw a trans man in upstate New York, in the New York area, get murdered, and the police came out and said it was one of the most horrific things they've ever seen, because it was like sadistic torture and murder. It wasn't just like stabbed in the street, move on. Not that that's better.
Yeah.
We just saw 200,000 people in the federal government lose their jobs on top of their random layoffs and rolling back environmental protections. There are bad things happening. Like we have to acknowledge that that's happening and not just go, no, like the court system will work it out or this will happen.
So I also want to, like, if you're listening right now and you've been feeling like a little bit out of your mind, or like maybe you're living in a different planet, just know your feelings are real and valid.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of articles and there's a lot of spaces where people are like, don't get distracted and the court cases will stop it and things aren't as bad as we think. We can say like things are effed up and things are bad. Like we are allowed to acknowledge that and sit with that. So just like off of some of the stuff that Marissa was saying, like if you've been feeling a little bit out of your mind, know that your feelings are real and valid.
Also, the stuff that's happening is low key insanity making.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just like sit with that grief. It's real. Sit with that sadness, sit with that fear. Like those are all real and valid. And don't let anyone convince you that they're not.
I want to say, too, if you're worried about the future, please know that you deserve to be here.
Yes.
You deserve to be here. Please stay here.
Yes.
I know it's scary and hard and sad. And like we're talking about death and loss and grief and these things, but you deserve to be here. And grief, as Alex said, is connected to love. Like those go together. So please stay.
And if there is a heaviness with some of the topics that we're talking about, from personal death to like death and grief to the social political culture around grief, know that we, as in Marissa and I and anyone listening, like we also don't have to experience it alone. Right? Like we shouldn't reach a point to where we're frozen for long amount of time. Like if we're talking about like a day or two where we need to just be like, I feel numb. Like I'm
a puddle. I can't do anything.
Over the last 6 months, I've had moments where I'm literally like, I feel numb and I just need to like chill.
I recommend Taskmaster.
Yeah.
It's a great show to kind of get you through some days.
But like there's been moments where I'm like, I feel numb. But I also know that like if I don't get out of it in a couple days or maybe even like a week tops, like I need to connect with friends or family or even a professional to say like, I need help. Like I am frozen and don't know what to do. Like this grief is heavy and it's not meant to be carried alone. We're meant to carry it together.
And we've talked about a lot today.
Yes.
And I'm hoping it resonates with some of you and it makes sense because at least in our personal circles, everyone who's on anxiety or depression meds, they've been upped with the post-election. So we know that it's a struggle that a lot of us are facing, and it's hard to put words to that. And I don't even know if we put all the words that we could to it.
No.
But we'd like to leave you all with some sort of call to action and not just an episode of ifs and whats and theories. So for me, Marissa, my call to action for you is to let your grief guide you. I want you to do something that you care about, and whether that's like a community involvement thing or you spending 30 seconds drawing a picture, do something that you care about. Let your grief guide you and hold that space and take a moment to feel that pain and be inspired or motivated, or even you can even be sad about it. But let that grief guide you and do something for yourself and something that you care about.
Yeah. And for example, like something I've been thinking a lot about with like letting grief guide is I've been like focusing on who my grandpa was and how he interacted in the world, and like he wasn't into this social media game that we're a part of.
I don't even know if he knew what the word Instagram was.
No, he was really, really involved in his community. So I've been asking myself, like, how can I intentionally be involved in community spaces offline? Like,
not just share an Instagram post, like actually
which like
doing
sharing
something.
and educating online has its place and is important.
As we're recording a podcast.
Yeah. And like, just to put a concrete example to it, like how can, like, that's how one way I'm letting my grief guide me to action is like, what are organizations and spaces I can be a part of in my community to be the person I want to be, and also to represent like the ancestry of the people that I know I am. And my call to action for you, or my challenge to you, is practice some mindfulness. And that relates a little bit to what Marissa was saying when she was talking about like drawing a picture, but like I challenge you to not pull out your phone, not flip on like a media source, or like not go like grab snacks or something, but like if you are feeling a big emotion, sit with it. Be that you're meditating, you're journaling, or you're talking to someone, or you go on a walk without any like podcast or things playing. If you're listening to this, you can pause it now and then sit with your thoughts. But like sit with those feelings and ask yourself, like, where is the root of this? What is it telling me? How is this tied to love? Or like, what is the love that I'm not being able to express?
I think an example of that for me is Alex and I will go on walks and runs.
Yes.
And we don't listen to anything. And people are always shocked. We're like, we never listen to music. Occasionally we have like a little clip on speaker that's out loud, but we never have headphones in our ears. So we'll chat during runs, but we also run in a neighborhood that we've seen hundreds of, if not thousands of times at this point. And I'll look at Alex and I'll see things on houses that I've never seen before. I'll see a door painted a new color. So even something like that, I'd be like, I'm going to walk down my block if you're able to, and be like, oh, let's look at the types of windows that are on 4 different houses and see if people have the same windows. Like something as simple as that can help.
We've also gone on walks and we've had these grounding conversations and been like, I'm feeling this emotion right now. And then we go back and forth and say like, what is making you feel like? What does that mean when you say that? And just like really digging into it. And to kind of wrap up this episode, which thank you all for people who have made it this far and are listening. I'm going to leave you with a quote from Andrew Garfield, because I just think it's a beautiful quote about grief and love, and kind of tied to what we were saying about like, it's connected to what something was and what something can be. I hope this grief stays with me because it's all the unexpressed love that I didn't get to share. So let that sit with you and think about, as we process grief and process these heavy emotions of our personal lives and the social political climate, how can we find ways to share that in some capacity with communities or with people that our loved ones might have wanted us to share with?
Thank you all for listening today, and we hope that you join us for the next episode.